Hi, my name is Olivia, and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to review Her Every Fear by Peter Swanson. As always, I'm going to keep this review spoiler-free, and let's get into the video. This is a thriller that follows Kate Pretty, an art student living in London who suffers from anxiety after a traumatic experience with an ex-boyfriend in which she was held captive against her will. In an attempt to recover from this incident, she agrees to swap apartments with her cousin Corbin, who lives over in the United States in Boston. However, when she first arrives at his apartment, she is very startled to find that police are swarming the building, especially the hallway and the apartment next door. She quickly learns that the occupant in the apartment next door, Audrey, had been murdered, and the police are beginning an investigation and actually question her as part of their inquiry. She knows very little about Corbin and has only met him a handful of times, so she doesn't feel like she's of much help. But as the investigation begins to unfold, she begins talking to some of the other residents and even an individual that she finds lurking outside the building at all hours of the day. This person claims to be an old boyfriend of the girl who was found dead, and Kate very quickly gets wrapped up in this murder and some of the rumors that are flying around, one of which implicates her cousin Corbin as potentially someone who committed the murder. The book unfolds from there and follows Kate as she tries to fit together the various pieces of this puzzle and make sense of what happened right before she arrived. This was my first time picking up a Peter Swanson book, and I was ultimately very torn on my rating. There were some components of this book that I absolutely loved, and there were others that I really hated. So it was a difficult one for me to rationalize and think through how I wanted to rate this book. Ultimately, I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars, so it wasn't awesome, but it also wasn't horrible. When I was about a third of the way through the book, I thought the plot was going to be very predictable. I thought I had figured out every single twist and turn and knew exactly where the book was headed, but I could not have been more wrong. And I think that was one of the strongest points of Peter Swanson's writing. Peter Swanson's very skilled at pointing readers in the completely wrong direction, and he really leads you down this path, giving you clues that seem to fall into place with the assumptions that you're making as you're reading. And as you get further and further through the book, you continue building on these assumptions. Needless to say, the final twist was a big shock to me. It really felt like Peter Swanson had been leading toward a very different ending, so I never saw this one coming, and that was one of my favorite components of the book. It's really interesting how Swanson framed all of the hints and clues that he gradually revealed. They made sense in the false direction that he was leading you toward, but they also make sense in the context of the actual solution. And I certainly didn't fit these pieces together correctly to get me to the final solution. Consequently, Swanson's writing style lends itself very well to building suspense and also deceiving readers as they're progressing through the book. And this was something that happened continually. Almost every single twist and turn I thought I foresaw very many pages in advance, and I was so far off from the truth every single time. So I like reading from authors that can keep me guessing and keep me on my toes in that sense when I'm reading a thriller. Most importantly though, all of these twists were actually plausible. They didn't seem like something so far out of left field that they never could have been predicted or you never would have arrived at that point on your own. There were definitely clues leading the way to those solutions. So it seemed very believable, very realistic, and very eerie and chilling. Moving on, I felt that one of the greatest weaknesses of Swanson's writing was his narration style. Throughout the book, you're jumping back and forth between different perspectives, and oftentimes you're revisiting and rewatching the same scenes from a different character's perspective. I found the constantly switching point of view very disorienting and jarring, especially at the very beginning of the book, when I felt like I didn't have a good grasp on the characters, who everybody was, what their histories were, their relationships with other people. All of these things just didn't seem to fall into place at the very beginning of the book. And it was a little bit off-putting when I first started reading. However, as the book progressed and I got a little bit more comfortable with each of the characters, I could somewhat see where Swanson was coming from in choosing this narration style. It really gave you insight into the personalities and mindsets of some of these characters, and it helped to rationalize some decisions that I probably wouldn't have made myself, but could now understand where each character was coming from. I think this really helped to connect me to the characters a little bit more, and it certainly made me have a little more sympathy towards some individuals in the book. With that being said, I think one of the biggest downfalls in this book was the amount of repetition, especially with jumping back and forth between different characters who were all present at the same scene and all recounting pretty much the same sequence of events. Seeing some of these scenes from multiple perspectives over and over again did nothing to further the plot or the characterization, and I felt like it took away from some of the suspense and some of the captivating, nail-biting portions of the book that kept me reading. It led to this odd, continual regurgitation of the same facts and details and hints throughout the book. And it very much felt like Peter Swanson was constantly trying to remind readers of, hey, this thing was important. You should pay attention to this other thing. This will come up later. As a reader, I think I can keep track of that in a 300 or 350 page book. So I didn't need these constant reminders or constant pointing out important past events. All in all, any new information that was gained from these multiple perspectives could have been conveyed in some other way, and it would have been far less repetitive. So I would have preferred Swanson exploring a few other alternatives before he jumped to multiple narrators recounting the same exact events with very little variation in each of their stories. Lastly, the ending felt drawn out, superficial, and a little lackluster, especially for a book that had been building so much suspense and tension and really sucked me in the first 50 to 75%. When I finished the book, I could already think of a handful of endings that I would have preferred as alternatives. The ending that Swanson wrote just didn't seem to do the book justice, and it was really the downfall for me and something that lowered my rating quite considerably. The believability of the conclusion was questionable at best, and it seemed very, very coincidental that all of these pieces magically fell into place perfectly, and that the ending worked out the way that it did. I was also hoping for more of an uncertain and ambiguous ending, but the ending that Swanson wrote very much tied up all of the loose ends, tied up all of the plot points, tied up all of the characters, and it really left nothing to the imagination, which I think was a huge opportunity missed in this case. I think ambiguous endings can be hit or miss in thrillers, and they definitely have a time and a place, and I think this book would have been the perfect opportunity for such an ambiguous ending. I wanted a little more left up to my imagination and leaving me wondering after I read the book, but I didn't really get that sense. There was more of a sense of closure and no real loose ends that hadn't been addressed. The ending was disappointing to say the least, and it definitely sealed the deal on a 3-star or lower rating for me. This book easily could have been 4 or 5 stars had the ending been changed, and I was really hoping for a stronger conclusion to a book that I loved for the first half of it. Even though this wasn't the conclusion that I'd hoped for, I haven't completely written off Peter Swanson's books, and I'm actually looking forward to picking up a few more of them in the future and seeing if those books work better for me. It could have been that this book just was not for me. I'm willing to admit that, and I'm definitely planning to give him a second or third chance to impress me with his writing in some other books. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read this book, if you have any thoughts that you wanted to share about it, or if you've read any of Swanson's other books and have recommendations for which one I should pick up next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.